true story of America has been a forgotten one, hidden deep in the portals of time, existing under the notion that it would never be uncovered and revealed. It been unknown for hundreds of years. We were only provided false information in order to hide the greater truth. No, Black Indians are not solely the result of African slaves mixing with Red Indians, as many other Black Indian sources would have you to believe. This is only a small portion of the legacy. Black Indians are indigenous to this land before the so-called Red Man, before the Europeans, before the so-called Bering Strait. We, the Olmecs, Washita, Yamasee, Moors, and mound builders, planted the seed of this civilization in this country, America. Today we are the remnants of these elders, and it is time that we reveal the bigger picture, our true legacy, not as former African slaves, not as immigrants, but as what we were and what we are. This educational series will chronicle the original indigenous people of America and how they came to be known as the people we know today. The indigenous people of this land, we are still here. Now, without further ado, we will delve directly into the indigenous peoples of this land. The indigenous. When the enormous monoliths were uncovered from Mexico, the sculptured images that were carved to form 24-ton heads from a single mass of basalt rock had been discovered. No one suspected this mysterious part of a civilization that only seemed to have vanished. At the cultural paradox of this civilization, La Venta, 18 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, 4 colossal heads were unearthed. The monoliths had been carbon dated. The results of the carbon-14 tests of the stone heads found in Mexico caused a startling uproar amongst archaeological circles. Various additional testing was performed. However, the earliest date that the carbon testing came up with regarding the stone images was the year 291 BC. As more diggings were performed in Middle America, larger heads were discovered. 24 tons was the average sum of the weight. The new discoveries were even more mysterious, for the colossal heads continued to turn up even earlier dates. 4 heads in all were excavated at the city of La Venta alone, with the largest head standing 9 feet tall. Ancient Middle American civilizations, or Mesoamerica antiquity, is divided into 3 epochs: Archaic, before Christ; Classic, during the first 1,000 years AD; and Post-Classic, from 1000 AD to Spanish conquest. The monolith of La Venta was dated and placed in the Archaic period, which proved the existence of a civilization in Mesoamerica thousands of years before organized monotheistic religions. Perhaps more staggering than the result of the carbon dating of these stone figures is the apparent construction and proportions of the monoliths. According to archaeological circles, the statues were constructed from one massive chunk of basalt block mined from stone quarries 80 miles away and transported to the center of La Venta with a sum weight of 20 to 40 tons each. It seems these stones were rolled over vast tracts of land or transported down a river on wooden rafts, however, presenting somewhat of an illogical and even incomprehensible method of material transportation. The monoliths proved to be only elementary in cultural archaeology. At present, between 25 and 40 Archaic period Mesoamerican sites have been discovered. The majority of these finds have occurred in the states of Veracruz, which totals 246 recorded pieces with over 180 sculptures, altars, and stone heads. The revelation of this hidden civilization reconstructed the indigenous history that has now been extended to reveal a hidden past. It is apparent that the Archaic period preceded even some of the great civilizations of the East, 900 to 400 BC. The people of this period were not primates. These archaic indigenous inhabitants belonged to a class of Homo sapiens, thus leading to the belief that the ancient Amerikkka, despite the narrow-minded kaleidoscope view of cave dwellers and tree climbers, was a highly advanced civilization. We see this in the advanced artistry and sculpturing, which was quite different than the art and sculpturing of tribal cultures. Mesoamerica archaeology proves enough data to suggest that these inhabitants were a high-status group with the presence of elite leaders, a military force, a political hierarchy, and a quite obviously, or at least sensible, penal system, as opposed to a primitive tribal culture's vigilante methods of punishment. Historians speculate on the actual racial identity of these inhabitants. Many hypotheses suggest that the archaic inhabitants were of Mayan linguistic stock. The contradiction to this hypothesis would be that the inhabitants spoke an ancestral form of mixed Zoqueen. Other historians speculate that the people who populated Mesoamerica were Mongoloid people who crossed over between Siberia and Alaska and were called Paleo-Siberian or ice hunters. Upon research in the etymology of the term Paleo-Siberian, we find paleo from the Greek word pale to mean ancient or primitive. Siberian has dual meanings. Sib from the Greek word sipa to mean kinship, family related by blood, and Aryan from the Sanskrit word Arya to mean noble, in reference to the Persian language. Arya also denotes a sub-tribe of people who migrated from Turkey into Palestine and were given the name Caucasian from the regions of the Caucasus Mountains. However, the stone images were not the depiction of Siberians or Mongoloids. The archaeologists are not in agreement with the identity of these inhabitants, or more correctly, have denied indisputable truth of their origin. However, since the mysterious unearthing of the ancient civilizations, one name has surfaced from later transcriptions. The name was Olmec. Who were these people called Olmec? Can we speculate that these people of the colossal heads were Asians who crossed the Bering Strait, or Siberian icemen who migrated from Europe? Jose Maria y Serrano, upon excavating one of the monolith heads in this region of San Andreas Tuxtla, published a short passage in the Bulletin of the Mexican Geographical Statistical Society, and I quote, "As a work of art, it is without exaggeration a magnificent sculpture. But what most amazes me was the type that it represents, a Ethiopian African. I conclude that there had doubtlessly been black Negroids in this region from the very earliest ages of the world." Unquote. In 1939, Dr. Matthew Sterling led a joint team from the National Geographic Society into the Gulf of Mexico to spearhead a major digging operation in Veracruz to unearth the monolithic heads. Sterling concluded, and I quote, "The features are bold and amazingly Negroid in character." Unquote. The archaeological cultural data overwhelmingly confirms the depiction of Negroid faces. Further archaeological evidence of the Negroid in ancient America is found in the Monte Alban culture, which seems to have begun at the end of Olmec culture. In Monte Alban, 140 Negroid-type figures have been discovered. Upon archaeological research, there is no logical denying of the Negroidness found in the art of the ancient Americas. Although there has been denial amongst historians, archaeologists have indeed confirmed at least 4 major facts. Number 1. The Olmecs date back to the Archaic period. Number 2. The Olmec civilization parallels the dynastic periods of Egypt. Number 3. The Olmecs were not Paleo-Siberians or evolving Neanderthals. And number 4. Evidence points to the Olmecs being of African ancestry. Skeletons have also been unearthed in pre-Columbian layers in the valley of the Pecos River that flows through Texas and New Mexico and empties into the Rio Grande of the Gulf of Mexico. Professor Houghton, a physical anthropologist, concluded, and I quote, "The Pecos skull resembles most closely the cranial of Negroid groups coming from Africa, where Negroes commonly have some perceptible infusion of Hamitic blood." Unquote. The Pecos skull resembles most closely the cranial of Negroid groups coming from Africa, where Negroes commonly have some perceptible infusion of Hamitic blood. Unquote. Professor Houghton refers to Hamitic blood. Hamitic blood is the blood of the Negroid, since the Ham, Shemites, were the dark seed which were forbidden to interbreed with the Canaanites. The word Ham translates as black in biblical Aramaic. Finds like these, in addition to the Negroid-styled heads, forces us to consider the parallel between ancient America and Africa. However, historians dismiss these similarities as mere coincidence. Archaeologists, on the other hand, conclude that the Olmecs who sculpted these monoliths have been shown to be absolute masters of realistic portraiture and did not arrive at the distinct Negroid features by accident. It is also noted that there could not possibly be a coincidence of stylization of a distinct people with facial features and characteristics which separates them from the features and characteristics of all other races on this planet. There can be no room for geographical coincidence that the very period that the Negroid appeared in Mexico, that was the same period when the first pyramid, mummies, and hieroglyphics began to appear in Mesoamerica as well. Is it a coincidence that the Teotihuacan head of pre-Columbian Mexico greatly resembles early Mandingo clay heads and Nigerian images? Many of the historians today have confirmed to the speculation of the Olmec monolith heads. They cannot explain the representation of the Negroid, despite the coloration, the fullness of the lips, prognathism, tattoos, tribal markings and tribal scarification, kinky hair, the broad nose, and the Egyptian-style military accessories. Historians now speculate that the sculptures were not constructed by Negroid people, but perhaps by Asians. If this had indeed been the case, why would people erect such huge monuments of Negroid representation? Why would Asians build colossal monuments to portray the Negroid of Africa when they had their own gods and legendary heroes? So realistic are these representations of the Negroid that it is extremely difficult to suggest that these figures were constructed by anyone other than Negroids themselves. Were the Asians attempting to construct an Egyptian metropolis by erecting Negroid stone heads, pyramids, clay pottery, which is identical to the Egyptian and even the Nigerian art? How could the Asians arrive at the startling similarities between the Olmec civilization and the Egyptian civilization? Even more absurd than these claims is how the Asians built these monolith heads. It is interesting to note the similarities between the mysteries of the construction of the Olmec heads and the pyramids of Egypt, both Negroid civilizations. The historical professor's hypotheses are in fact denials of an ancient Negroid civilization in America, which predates all other ancient civilizations and cultures in America. No one has denied that the Olmec civilization is perhaps the oldest of America that stretches back into antiquity, nor is there any legitimate denial that the Olmec monoliths represent Negroid people. However, there is denial that the true indigenous people of America were Negroid. Research shows that the Olmecs did not mysteriously vanish as suggested by historians, but that the Olmecs migrated far north and mixed in with the 4th century Chinese missionaries under Buddhist monk Hu Shen, who traveled to what is now California and produced what Columbus mistakenly called Indian and the British called the Red Man. Other Olmecs migrated to Southeast America and established settlements. Research suggests that Olmecs mixed in with Negroid traders from Morocco, the Moors, thus becoming known as Washoe, and established governments and sovereign nations thousands of years prior to the arrival of the Europeans. These claims have thus been repudiated by historical circles who have gone beyond the call of duty to counteract the suggestion that the original Native American, in every sense of the word, were African, Negroid, Black, Egyptian, or Nubian people, and not red men living in huts and teepees. So, who were the Olmecs? Where did they come from and why? Why does the Olmec culture parallel Egyptian culture? Who are the black gods carved in the stone found in Mexico? Did the Olmecs simply vanish, or do they still exist today under various names like African American, Negro, Black, Mexican, Puerto Rican? Is there a cover-up governed by archaeological and historical circles to hide the present identity of Olmecs in order to protect the land that would otherwise technically and literally be owned by these indigenous people? We owe it to ourselves to unearth the largest find to date. This find is that of the very first Americans. Where did the Olmecs come from? The Olmecs came from Nubwa in Central Africa, and they migrated to America, in which they named in their Kushite language Utala, which means vacate. When the Olmecs discovered that there was actually a North Utala and South Utala, the word Utala became plural, which became Atlan, which is where the word Atlantis and Atlanta came from. The Olmecs were a tribe in Africa called Dogon in Mali. When the Dogons migrated to America, they also imported the rubber tree, which is only indigenous to Africa. The Dogons used the sap from the rubber tree to make shoes, coats, capes, and they were the first to introduce soles on shoes in the New World. The name Olmec means rubber people. The rubber was also used to make large balls for the Olmecan ball game ceremonies, which was played in large stone arenas. When Christopher Columbus arrived in the West, he states that he saw natives kicking around a large ball that was made of some type of acacia. Columbus took some of these trees and balls back to Spain with him, and today, soccer is the favorite national sport of Spain. These Olmecs set up empires and cities that predates even the Inca, the Aztecs, and the Mayans. The Olmecs were not Siberians. The Olmecs were dark-skinned, big-lipped, wide-nosed Africans, just as they are portrayed in the stone monoliths. The step pyramids of Egyptians closely resembles the step pyramids found in the Americas. The double crown of Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt with the bird and the serpent is also found in Olmecan culture, with Upper and Lower Egypt being Northern and Southern America. The Mexicans have 4 calendars. The 4th calendar is identical to the Egyptian calendar. In Mexico, there was found a type of paper made from a specific type of wood pulp that scientists say can only be found in Egypt. Even the ceremonial dance of the Hopi Indians is identical to the Dogon's Bado dance of Africa, using the same symbols and spirit names. Various tribes such as the Osage and the Apache use the crescent moon symbol, which is the national symbol of Angola, Mauritania, Tanzania, the Sahara, and Algeria, all found on the continent of Africa.
I've been here for as long as I remember, running through the plains of civilized Ethiopia. Way back then we used to call it Abyssinia, played by the Nile River, me and my brothers. I came via vessel called my mother. We spoke mentally, then she conceived me immaculately. My father is Osiris and we took trips to Sirius. Stopped on Mars where we built a few pyramids. Came back home, I knew it wouldn't be long before the invasion began, so we wrote it in stone. Me and Mello took a quick trip to Asia, scoped the place out before they called it minor major. Built a few temples to praise we, the Buddha. The people called us Nagas, symbolic of the dragon. I've been to places you can't even imagine. Put the Jupe in Jupiter, put the rings around Saturn. Carved out the rocks for that Stonehenge pattern. We played with the stars before we started playing Madden. Do you remember? Can you recall? Cause if you think you were a slave, you can't remember at all. I said, Joe, do you remember? Can you recall? Cause if you think you were a slave, you can't remember at all. Yo, it's all for the love, so I love what I does. ALD, think of me till your heart hears a buzz. Here's a buzz.
Now, you may be wondering, hey, he just kind of skimmed over that little part about the blacks mating with the Chinese to produce the Red Indian. Well, I'm going to attack that right now. You may be wondering, were there even blacks in China? And the answer to that is yes. There were indeed blacks in ancient China. The skeletal remains from southern China are predominantly Negroid. The people practice single burials, which is an African ritual. In northern China, the blacks founded many civilizations. The three major empires of China was the Jia dynasty, the Shang Yin dynasty, and the Zhao dynasty. The Zhao dynasty was the first dynasty founded by the Mongoloid people in China, called the Hua. The founders of the Jia and the Shang came from the fertile African crescent by way of Iran. Chinese civilization began along the Yellow River. Here the soil was fertile, and black Chinese farmers grew millet 4,000 years ago, and later soybeans. They also raised pig and cattle. By 3500 BC, the blacks in China were raising silkworms and making silk. The cultural hero Huang Di is a direct link of Africa. His name is pronounced in Old Chinese as Yuhai Handi or Hu Nak Kunte. He was supposed to have arrived in China from the west in 2282 BC and settled along the banks of the Low River in Shaanxi. This literal translation of Huang Di to Hu Nak Kunte is interesting because Kunte is a common clan name among the Manding speakers. The Africans or blacks that founded the civilization in China were often called Li Min, meaning black-headed people, by the Zhao dynasty. This term has affinity to the Sumero-Akudan term Sa-ge-ga, black-headed people. These Li Min are associated with the Chinese cultural hero Yao. We know very little about the sounds of the ancient Chinese because ancient Chinese was very different from Old Chinese and Middle Chinese and the modern Chinese dialects. This results from the fact that the Chinese dynasties were founded by a diverse ethnic group. Jia and Shang Li, i.e. Black Shang, were founded by Dravidian and Manding speakers. Shang Yin was founded by classic Mongoloids, and the Zhao by contemporary Chinese. This explains the difference in pronunciation for ancient Chinese spoken by the Jia and Shang peoples and Old and Middle Chinese, or a variant thereof which is spoken by the Zhao people. The Shang characters compare favorably to the ancient Proto-Saharan script used by the Harappans in the Indus Valley, and the Manding script used in the ancient Sahara and Crete. Clyde Winters outlined the spread of the Proto-Saharan script to Harappa and throughout the Sahara African and Asian by the Dravidians and the Manding. Evidence of Chinese writing first appears around 2000 BC as pottery markings. The shell and bone characters represented writing. They were not pictures but wedges similar to African cuneiform. The Shang symbols compare favorably with ancient Manding symbols as well. Although there are different contemporary pronunciations for these symbols, they have the same meaning and shape. This suggests the genetic relationship between these scripts because we know that the present pronunciation of the Chinese symbol probably has little relationship to the ancient pronunciation of Chinese spoken in the Jia and Shang times when these characters were first used. This cognation of scripts supports the proposed Dravidian and Manding migration and settlement of China during the Jia times. The identification of the first hero of China, Hu Nat Kunte, as a member of the Kunte clan of the Manding speakers of Africa is supported by the close relationship between the Manding languages and the Chinese. Even though we do not know the ancient pronunciation of many Chinese signs, many Chinese and Manding words share analogy and suggest a Manding substratum for Chinese. I mentioned Black Shang, so I will further explain. There were two Shang empires. The first Shang dynasty was Shang Li, meaning Black Shang. It was ruled by Li Shang or Black Shang. For the last 273 years of the Shang Empire, the capital was situated at Anyang. The Shang Empire based at Anyang was founded by the Yin nationality. We call this empire Shang Yin. Thus we have Shang Li Empire and the Shang Yin Empire. The Yin were classical Mongoloid people related to the Thai and other small Mongoloid Austronesian speaking people situated in Southeast Asia. The use of the blackbird as the father of Zhai relates to the blackbird as a popular totem of black ethnic groups in China. This indicates that the founders of Shang were of mixed origin. The bird myth I just mentioned, which is centered on the east coast of China, suggests black origin for Shang, since this area was the heartland of ancient China. Both the ancient Chinese and Africans had similar naming practices. As in Africa, the Shang child had both a day name and a regular name. The Shang child was named according to the days of the sun on which he was born. There were 10 days in each sun. These days are called the 10 celestial signs. In the mulberry tree tradition, one day 10 suns rose from a mulberry and the archer Yi shot them down. He actually only shot 9 down. The suns in reality were birds. The bird myth refers to the blackbirds that founded the Shang dynasty. The fact that only one of the 10 birds survived the arrows of the archer of Yi may be related to the unification of the 10 clans of the Shang dynasty. The reference to blackbirds in the Chinese literature relate to the African origin of the Shang rulers. The use of the term blackbird relates to the fact that these blacks had a bird as their totem. There is a similar account in Native American history, where the blackbird rescues the red bird from the white bird, which retreats back into the caves. This analogy is a reference to the Negroid releasing the red Indian from the clutches of the European colonialism. We know that birds do not live in caves. The cave is a reference to the mountains of Europe, the Caucasus Mountains. And as far as blacks in Asia today, many Africans and Chinese mixed and moved far north into Tibet, where they become known as nomads and live a very similar life to the Africans in Kenya. The Dravidian speakers originally came from Nubia. They were related to the Sea Group people. The Shang culture was founded by the Kushites, thus the name Yi, meaning great bowman, thus corresponding to Stu, the name for the founders of the Tatseti, the first monarchy in history. The Yi seem to have lived in both North and South China. Fu Su Nin in Yi His Tunga Shao makes it clear that the Shang culture bearer remained allied to the rest of the Yi people who lived in southern China. The founders of Jia are usually referred to as Yue, as opposed to Yi. It would appear that most of Yi were Dravidian speakers, while Yue were Manding speakers. The first Shang king of Zhuan Wang, meaning black king. Zhuan means black. He was called Zhuan Di, meaning black emperor. The founder of the Shang dynasty was called Zhuan Nao, meaning black bird. Another Shang king was called Zhuan Mu, meaning black oxen. And the list goes on and on and on.